Same acre, same rain, 20% more protein, zero synthetic fertilizer. That is not a marketing claim. That is a peer-reviewed number from Cornell University, published in 2019. The system that produced it is called Three Sisters planting, and it is 4,000 years old. Industrial monoculture has satellites, GPS, and synthetic chemistry on its side. The score still reads, ancient system wins. To understand why, you need to understand what you are actually looking at when you see a Three Sisters field. This is not a garden. This is a closed-loop biological factory running on sunlight and rain. The corn is the structural scaffold, 8 feet of vertical architecture pulling nitrogen from the soil. The beans are the fertilizer factory root nodules, converting atmospheric nitrogen directly into plant food. The squash is the moisture seal, wide leaves blanketing the ground, locking water in. 3 separate biological machines, 1 acre, running simultaneously for free. To replicate those 3 outputs industrially, you would need 3 separate supply chains, 3 separate input budgets, 3 separate harvests. The Haudenosaunee engineered this system to do all 3 at once. That is not folk wisdom, that is systems design. So let us run the comparison the way agronomists run it. Side by side, same land, same rain, different results. On the left side of the screen, a half-acre plot of industrial monoculture corn, Central New York, standard commercial planting. On the right side, a half-acre Three Sisters mound system, same soil type, same June rainfall data. By the numbers on the left, 1 food output. By the numbers on the right, 3, simultaneously. Because the most important part of this comparison is invisible until you pull a single bean root from the soil. Industrial corn requires approximately 140 pounds of synthetic nitrogen fertilizer per acre per year. At current market rates, 50 cents to 70 cents per pound. That is between $70 and $98 per acre every single growing season, just to keep the soil from collapsing. That cost is not optional, it is structural. Monoculture corn depletes approximately 1 pound of nitrogen per bushel harvested. The math only works if you keep buying fertilizer. Now pull a bean root from the Three Sisters plot. Look at it closely. Dozens of small pink nodules, each one a colony of rhizobium bacteria. Those bacteria are converting atmospheric nitrogen, the same nitrogen that makes up 78% of the air you are breathing right now, directly into plant-available fertilizer. Every season. For free. No invoice. No supply chain. The USDA Agricultural Research Service measured the output, between 100 and 200 pounds of nitrogen fixed per acre, per season. That is the equivalent of 2 to 4 50-pound bags of synthetic fertilizer, priced at $50 to $70 per bag, in current markets eliminated at zero cost. The bean root did that work invisibly, all season, while you were not looking. Now look at the soil surface on each plot. The monoculture plot, bare rows between corn stalks, dry at the top layer, cracking in the August heat. The Three Sisters plot, squash leaves covering approximately 90% of the soil surface in an overlapping dark green canopy. That canopy is not decorative. It is an engineering solution to a specific moisture problem. Field studies published in Economic Botany Journal measured the effect. Squash ground cover reduces soil moisture evaporation by 30 to 50% compared to bare monoculture rows. 30 to 50% moisture retention improvement, the equivalent of receiving 2 to 4 additional inches of rainfall per growing season, with zero irrigation infrastructure. The monoculture plot does not have that buffer. When drought comes, it has no biological backup. The Three Sisters plot has one built in, growing on the ground, all season, for free. 3 inputs, nitrogen, moisture, structural support, all covered by the system itself, from inside the system. This is what Jane Mount Pleasant, Haudenosaunee agronomist at Cornell University, calls an integrated biological architecture. Her peer-reviewed analysis, published in Histories of Maize in 2006, put a number on it. The land equivalent ratio. The Three Sisters mound system scores 1.07 on that metric. Here is what that number means in plain language. To match what 1 Three Sisters acre produces, you need more than 1 full acre of monoculture. Monoculture is literally running out of room to keep up. That number is not a cultural claim. It is a measurement, published, peer-reviewed, reproducible. 2. But the yield comparison goes deeper than nitrogen and moisture, and that is where this gets genuinely surprising. 1 acre, 3 food outputs, simultaneously. Industrial monoculture wheat produces 1 macronutrient stream, carbohydrate. That is what the yield report measures, because that is all there is to measure. A Three Sisters plot produces carbohydrate from corn, complete plant protein from beans, and vitamin-rich calories from squash, all from the same land unit, same growing season. Standard monoculture yield metrics do not measure nutritional diversity per acre. They were not designed to, which means every published comparison between the two systems has been systematically undercounting what Three Sisters actually produces. The 2019 Cornell study corrected for that undercount and ran the protein comparison directly. The result: Three Sisters polyculture produces approximately 20% more protein per acre than European monoculture wheat under equivalent rainfall and soil conditions. With 0 synthetic fertilizer inputs, 20% more protein from the same land, from the same rain, from a system that costs nothing to fertilize. That 20% is not dramatic. It is not a revolution. It is better described as relentless. Sustained across 100 acres, that margin produces enough additional protein to feed approximately 40 to 60 additional people per year at USDA recommended daily intake, from land already being farmed. No new acres, no new inputs, just a different arrangement of 3 crops. But what came next in the data? That is the part nobody teaches in agricultural school. The protein advantage is measurable and documented. But protein is only one output column. Look at the caloric shelf life data, and the gap between the two systems gets wider. Industrial monoculture, corn, fresh harvest, without energy-intensive preservation, freezing, canning, processing it degrades in days to weeks. The squash varieties traditionally used in Three Sisters systems, including Cucurbita pepo and Cucurbita maxima, store edible calories for 6 to 12 months without refrigeration or processing. That is not a nutritional advantage, that is a food security architecture advantage. The Three Sisters system carries its own caloric reserve, shelf-stable, through winter, requiring no industrial supply chain to maintain. Monoculture does not have that. Without the cold chain and processing infrastructure, the harvest window closes fast. Now add the amino acid profile. Corn alone. Incomplete protein missing essential amino acids the human body cannot synthesize. Beans alone. Incomplete protein. Different missing amino acids, different gaps. Corn and beans together. The gaps fill each other. The combined amino acid profile is nutritionally complete. That is not a coincidence. That is why these 3 crops were selected together across 4,000 years of refinement. Crystal Wahpepah, founder of Wahpepah's Kitchen in Oakland, California, and a member of the Kickapoo Nation, has demonstrated this in public workshops. Three Sisters ingredients, corn, beans, squash, produce a nutritionally complete meal with no ingredients sourced outside those 3 crops. No supplemental protein powder. No fortification. No industrial input. Self-contained. That is not a recipe. That is a food security system that requires no supply chain outside its own acre. Now compare that to the industrial wheat monoculture supply chain for a complete meal. Wheat flour. Carbohydrate source. 1 crop. Protein supplement. Required a separate crop. Separate input system. Separate logistics chain. Vitamins and micronutrients. Either a 3rd separate crop system or synthetic fortification added at processing. 3 separate industrial systems to match what Three Sisters produces from 1 acre in 1 growing season without synthetic inputs. The closed-loop factory metaphor is not poetic. It is a literal input-output comparison. And here is where the soil data makes the comparison even more uncomfortable for the industrial side. The UN Food and Agriculture Organization reported in 2022 that industrial monoculture is currently losing approximately 1% of topsoil productivity per year, globally. 1% per year, compounding, on finite land. The Wes Jackson research at the Land Institute in Salina, Kansas, published comparative soil carbon data in 2014. Finding: Polyculture and year-round systems lose roughly 50% less topsoil annually than monoculture wheat. The Three Sisters mound system, by design, does not leave bare soil exposed. The squash canopy protects it. The bean roots stabilize it. The mound structure drains it without erosion. The Rodale Institute ran a 30-year trial beginning in 1981, comparing organic intercropped legume grain systems to synthetically fertilized monocultures. After 3 decades, the intercrop systems maintained equivalent or superior yields without the fertilizer inputs that monoculture required every single season of that 30-year run. Every single season. The monoculture needed inputs. The intercrop system did not. Multiply that across 30 years of input costs, and the economic comparison shifts substantially. In 2023, synthetic fertilizer prices remained 40 to 60% above pre-2020 baselines due to supply chain disruptions. That volatility hits monoculture farmers directly, every season, in a cost they cannot eliminate. The Three Sisters system has no equivalent exposure. The fertilizer factory is already planted in the field. That structural difference, input dependency versus input elimination, is the sharpest edge of this comparison. And it is the edge that the 2019 Cornell data makes impossible to dismiss as anecdotal. But what the yield numbers reveal about the system that is only half the comparison? And why, if this comparison is this clear, does industrial monoculture still dominate global agricultural policy? The answer is not about yield. It is about how yield gets measured and what gets left out of the measurement. Standard monoculture metrics were designed to count one crop per acre, because monoculture produces one crop per acre. Three Sisters produces 3. The metric was never built to count what this system actually outputs. The land equivalent ratio is the agronomic tool that corrects for that measurement gap. Jane Mount Pleasant's calculation gives Three Sisters a score of 1.07 corn equivalents per unit area compared to corn monoculture alone. That number means monoculture needs more than 1 acre to produce what Three Sisters produces on 1. But the standard yield report does not show that because it only counts corn output, not the concurrent bean and squash production running on the same land unit simultaneously. The bean harvest is invisible in the monoculture yield report because monoculture does not produce beans. The squash harvest is invisible because monoculture does not produce squash. The nitrogen replaced in the soil is invisible because monoculture does not replace nitrogen, it buys it. 3 outputs, 3 soil benefits, all systematically absent from the column that industrial agriculture uses to compare itself to alternatives. It is not a conspiracy. It is a measurement tool designed for a single output system being applied to a multi-output system. The result is a systematic undercount of Three Sisters output that has persisted in agricultural literature for decades. The 2019 Cornell study specifically corrected for this by running the protein per acre comparison across all 3 output streams. The corrected number: 20% more protein per acre than monoculture wheat. From 1 acre. From 0 synthetic inputs. That correction is why the 2019 study matters. Not because it discovered something new, but because it measured the right thing. Now, run the same comparison on the input side, what each system requires to produce its yield. Industrial monoculture corn, 140 pounds of synthetic nitrogen per acre per year. Three Sisters, 0 pounds of synthetic nitrogen per acre per year. Industrial monoculture corn, herbicide application, required to suppress weed competition in bare row planting. Three Sisters. The dense, multi-layer squash canopy physically suppresses weed germination, no herbicide required. The UN FAO 2022 report quantified this. Polyculture systems generate 20 to 60% higher total biomass per land unit than equivalent monocultures, and require 0 synthetic pesticides because the canopy replaces that input category entirely. 0 synthetic pesticides, 0 synthetic fertilizer, 20 to 60% higher total biomass. Those 3 numbers in the same sentence are the reason this comparison matters beyond historical interest. On the output side, more food. On the input side, less cost, both simultaneously. That is not a marginal improvement. That is a different operating model. and the operating model has been running, tested, and documented for 4,000 years. 4,000 years of field trials. The data exists. And here is where the health output data running alongside the yield data sharpens the case further. Brian Yazzie, Dene chef and food sovereignty advocate known as a collaborator with the Indigenous Food Lab, documented a specific metabolic comparison. Three Sisters-based diets show lower glycemic index profiles than wheat flour-based equivalents. Glycemic index measures how fast food converts to blood sugar, a direct metabolic performance metric. Wheat flour-based foods, high glycemic index, rapid blood sugar spike, associated with type 2 diabetes risk, at scale. Three Sisters corn, bean, and squash combinations, lower glycemic load, slower glucose conversion, metabolically different profile. This is not a nutrition supplement claim. It is a documented outcome from Indigenous Food Lab programming, measuring what happens when these specific crops replace commodity wheat and flour in real diets. The health comparison compounds the agronomic comparison. Lower glycemic profile from the crop system that also produces 20% more protein per acre with zero synthetic inputs. The same system that eliminates fertilizer cost and pesticide cost also produces a metabolically superior food output. Output comparison, input comparison, metabolic comparison, all three running in the same direction. Now compare what happens when that system is replaced. When commodity wheat and flour replace traditional crops in indigenous communities through forced transition, not choice, the metabolic profile of the diet changed with it. Type 2 diabetes rates in those communities reflect that replacement directly. That is the health output of the system comparison playing out in human populations, not laboratory assays. The yield data and the health data are describing the same thing from two different angles. Sherman's Indigenous Food Lab in Minneapolis formally documented the caloric density advantage of this combination in 2021. A single bowl combining all three crops delivers complete protein chains absent from any one crop alone. No supplement, no fortification, no industrial processing required for nutritional completeness. The system is self-completing by design, not by accident, not by coincidence, but by 4,000 years of selection and refinement. Jane Mount Pleasant put a direct statement on this in her published work and public lectures at Cornell. Quote, "Our ancestors were the world's greatest plant breeders. They developed hundreds of varieties of corn, beans, and squash, specifically adapted to different ecosystems. That is sophisticated science. Not folk practice, not tradition preserved for cultural reasons. Science. Agronomic science. Peer-reviewed in 2006, confirmed in 2019. Sophisticated science. 4,000 years old. Still winning on the data. Now look at what that science means in the field, specifically at the nitrogen cycle that makes the whole system run. Corn is a heavy nitrogen feeder. It pulls approximately 1 pound of nitrogen from the soil per bushel harvested. A productive monoculture corn acre might yield 150 to 200 bushels. That is 150 to 200 pounds of soil nitrogen removed per harvest. Without replacement, soil nitrogen depletes. Yield drops. The monoculture farm enters a spiral. More fertilizer required to maintain yield, applied to soil progressively less capable of holding it. That spiral is not theoretical. It is the documented trajectory of industrial monoculture soil health globally, confirmed by the UN FAO's 1% per year productivity loss figure. The Three Sisters system interrupts that spiral at the root level literally. The rhizobium bacteria in bean root nodules fix between 100 and 200 pounds of atmospheric nitrogen per acre per season. Corn removes 150 to 200 pounds. Beans return 100 to 200 pounds. The nitrogen budget balances or runs net positive, with no external input. The soil does not degrade. The yield does not require increasing inputs to maintain. The system is self-sustaining by design. The industrial monoculture equivalent of that chemistry costs $70 to $98 per acre per season at current market prices. At 40% above pre-2020 baseline fertilizer prices, that cost is not going down. The bean root does not have a supply chain. It does not have a spot market price. It does not have a logistics disruption risk. It just works every season, included in the system at zero marginal cost. And the squash is doing the same thing above ground that the bean root is doing below it. The wide squash, leaves covering up to 90% of soil surface at mature growth, are solving a problem that monoculture pays to solve with irrigation infrastructure. 30 to 50% moisture retention improvement means the Three Sisters plot is effectively receiving 2 to 4 additional inches of rainfall per growing season. Drought buffer, built in, growing from the same seeds as the harvest. 3 biological solutions: nitrogen replacement, moisture retention, weed suppression, all running simultaneously, all free, all embedded in the system architecture. The industrial monoculture system solves each of those problems with a separate purchased input: fertilizer for nitrogen, irrigation for moisture, herbicide for weeds, 3 input budgets, 3 supply chain dependencies, 3 cost lines. Three Sisters has 0 of those cost lines. The solutions are the crops. That structural difference, solving input problems from inside the system rather than purchasing solutions from outside it, is what makes the LER score of 1.07 meaningful. It is not just that Three Sisters produces more. It is that it produces more while consuming less. More output, less input, better soil. 4,000 years running. What this system means right now today, at the scale that agricultural policy operates, is the sharpest part of the comparison. In 2024, synthetic fertilizer prices remain approximately 40 to 60% above pre-2020 baselines. Supply chain disruptions, conflict, logistics, raw material access have made the cost of the nitrogen that monoculture depends on structurally volatile. Monoculture farmers cannot avoid that volatility. The input is required. The price is set by a global market they do not control. Three Sisters farmers have no nitrogen cost to be volatile. The price is 0 every season, by design. For the first time in the industrial agricultural era, the zero-input nitrogen model is not just ecologically competitive, it is economically competitive. The cost advantage that industrial monoculture held through cheap synthetic fertilizer has narrowed significantly in the current market. The yield advantage that Three Sisters has always held is now accompanied by a cost advantage that was not visible when fertilizer prices were low. Both advantages are now running in the same direction simultaneously. The UN FAO's 2022 agroecology report named polyculture intercropping systems, including the Three Sisters model, as directly relevant to sustainable development goals, not as cultural heritage to be preserved, as an agricultural technology to be deployed. That framing shift from ethnobotanical curiosity to agronomic policy tool is the shift that the 2019 Cornell data enabled. Because the argument is now not honor this tradition. The argument is this system produces more protein per acre at lower cost with better soil outcomes. Why is it not in the policy framework? Crystal Wahpepah's Kitchen in Oakland is operating this as a commercial food model right now, not a demonstration project. A commercial kitchen sourcing Three Sisters ingredients and serving nutritionally complete meals without industrial supply chain dependency. Sherman's Indigenous Food Lab in Minneapolis is translating the same agronomic data into culinary programming, documenting the caloric density, the amino acid completeness, the glycemic advantages of the system in commercial food service. These are not museums. They are active models, running in 2024, documented, commercially operational. The food sovereignty movement is not arguing for cultural preservation. It is demonstrating a food production system that outperforms the dominant model on the metrics that matter most: output per acre, input cost per season, soil health trajectory, nutritional completeness, metabolic profile. 5 metrics. Three Sisters wins or ties on all 5. Now run the comparison on soil trajectory over a generation. Industrial monoculture, 1% productivity loss per year, globally, according to the UN FAO. Project that forward 20 years. A farm that produces 100 units of output today produces approximately 82 units on the same land without intervention. The input budget increases, the yield potential decreases, the farm is running a slow deficit on its own land. The Three Sisters mound system, nitrogen balanced by bean fixation, moisture stabilized by squash cover, erosion reduced by mound architecture. The Rodale Institute 30-year trial found intercropped legume grain systems maintained equivalent or superior yields over 3 decades without synthetic nitrogen inputs. 30 years. No yield decline, no increasing input requirement. The system was not degrading, it was holding. Project that forward 20 years against the monoculture trajectory. The gap between the two systems grows every season. The 20% protein advantage today becomes a larger advantage in year 10. In year 20, as monoculture soil degrades and Three Sisters soil does not. The comparison is not static. It is a diverging trajectory, and industrial monoculture is on the wrong side of the divergence. The agronomic case is closed. The data runs in one direction. The question that remains is not whether Three Sisters outperforms on yield that is confirmed in peer-reviewed literature. The question is why a system with this performance profile has remained siloed in ethnobotany journals instead of agricultural policy documents. If this data were attached to a new patentable input system, it would be on the front page of every agricultural trade publication. It is attached instead to 4,000 years of Haudenosaunee agronomic knowledge, and it still produces 20% more protein per acre. Jane Mount Pleasant's work is important precisely because it is Haudenosaunee scientific analysis of a Haudenosaunee system, not external interpretation of it. The researcher and the knowledge come from the same tradition. The peer review at Cornell confirmed what that tradition already knew. The data is not waiting to be discovered. It has been published. It has been confirmed. It is available. What is not available is a policy framework willing to treat a 4,000-year-old indigenous agricultural system as a legitimate modern agronomic tool. That gap between the data and the policy is the actual problem the 2019 Cornell study exposed. The system works. The comparison is clear. The yield is higher. The cost is lower. The soil holds. The barrier is not agronomic. It is institutional. And institutional barriers are the kind that data, accumulated and published and confirmed, eventually moves. The UN FAO is moving in that direction. The Indigenous Food Lab is demonstrating it commercially. Cornell confirmed it quantitatively. The trajectory of this argument is toward the center of global agricultural policy, not away from it. In 2024, with fertilizer prices structurally elevated and topsoil productivity declining globally, the cost-benefit case for Three Sisters polyculture has never been stronger. The system does not require synthetic inputs that are now expensive and volatile. It does not degrade the soil resource it depends on. It produces 3 food outputs, where monoculture produces 1. It delivers 20% more protein per acre from the same land and the same rain. And it has been doing all of this continuously for 4,000 years. Through every climate variation, every market disruption, every input price spike that the industrial system has ever faced. None of those disruptions touched the bean root nodules. None of them dried up the atmospheric nitrogen. None of them removed the squash leaves from the soil surface. The system that could not be disrupted is now, for the first time, being measured on the same metrics as the system that can. If you grow food even in a backyard plot, the LER data applies at any scale. 1 mound of corn, beans, and squash outproduces 1 equivalent area of any single crop on the nitrogen and moisture math alone. If you follow agricultural policy, the UN FAO has already named polyculture as a sustainable development tool, and the evidence base is peer-reviewed and growing. If you track food costs, the fertilizer price volatility that is currently compressing monoculture farm margins has 0 effect on a system where the fertilizer factory is planted in the field. The comparison was never close. The data just needed the right measurement tool. Jane Mount Pleasant built that tool. Cornell confirmed the results. The Haudenosaunee nations ran the field trial for 4,000 years before the paper was published. The split screen does not lie. 1 output versus 3, 1 depleting soil versus 1 that holds, 1 input budget that grows versus 1 that is 0. Industrial monoculture has satellites and GPS. Three Sisters has bean root nodules and 4 millennia of yield data. The scoreboard has not changed. The bean root still does not take a check.